Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Basu and Godin Notebook on this Friday, February 16th. Montreal Canadiens have decided to have a day off, Arpin, but we don't. We never have a day off. We keep going every day.
Keep going, yeah. Yeah, well, generally after you play a football game, you get a day off. So when you give up a touchdown, again.
That's
yeah.
It happened. If I recall correctly, it happened not so long ago.
Yeah, twice in 5 days or 4 days actually. So yeah, Canadians take a beating from the New York Rangers, and actually, I think in both those cases, both the case of the game against the Blues and the game against the Rangers, giving up the 7 goals was more a reflection of the goaltending the Canadiens got in that game than the way they actually played. Jake Allen, we went over it on the last episode, was not up to par, not even close, in the game against the Blues and on Sunday. And Sam Montembeault was not very good against the Rangers. I mean, listen, I think some of the goals, there wasn't a whole lot he could have done, but I think there were a few goals there that he definitely should have stopped and could have kept his team in the game. Canadiens produced 4 goals against a pretty good defensive team in the Rangers. You could argue that a couple of them came kind of in garbage time, but they did keep the game within reach. Obviously we're making light of the fact they gave up 7 goals twice in a span of 3 games. But I do honestly believe that both those cases, playing against teams that were pretty hot in both cases, although the Blues really laid an egg the next game in Toronto, but yeah, that's the Canadiens didn't play quite as bad as the 7 goal turnout for the other team would suggest.
Something I've noticed though is that Martin St. Louis is not keen on pulling his goalie, on replacing. So in both instances. Allen stayed in there for all 7 goals on Sunday. Montembeault stayed there the whole game at Madison Square Garden. In Boston on January 20th, Montembeault gave up 8 goals before he was replaced by Kenyon Primo to finish the game against the Bruins. And there were other instances since last season where the starting goalie would stay in there despite giving up either 7 or 8 goals, and even 9. I think there was one occasion with Jake Allen where Jake gave 9 goals and stayed there the whole game. So it's really not in his habit. It seems as though once they've decided like who's going to play the next game or managing the amount of energy that's being spent by one goalie or the other, they don't seem to be too bothered by replacing said goalie during a game, which is surprising.
Well, it's a bit weird because that's like one of the benefits of having 3 goalies. There's not that many, but one of the benefits of having 3 goalies is that if you find yourself in a situation like you did, like the Canadiens were in on Thursday in New York, even if Jake Allen, it was slated to play on Saturday, which we don't know right now, but let's say he was, it's Thursday. So putting him in the game would not kill you. And B, if he does play a lot or gets a lot of shots or whatever, you decide that his workload was too high, you have a third goalie who you could put in, who's coming off a shutout, who you could put in on Saturday, or you can put Montembeault back in. I mean, there's tons of options. And yeah, I agree. I don't know where it comes from. But yeah, he's extremely reluctant to do it, and it is odd. And I think, generally speaking, it's one of the things, like one of the game management things that we see that Marty's kind of trying to get a handle on. There's, he'll make line changes between periods sometimes. Very rarely in the middle of the period. He's, on the fly adjustments, he tends to give a lot of benefit of the doubt to his guys, which might be a player's mentality. Trust your guys to figure out a way. And maybe this is a case with the goalies. Like I know a lot of goalies prefer to fight with their teammates and battle back. Um, so I think this reluctance to kind of pull goalies is kind of a greater or one example, I guess, of Marty's sort of reluctance to make in-game adjustments and how it's one of these things he's still trying to get a handle on as a coach.
Yeah.
I thought that game against the Rangers, there could have been an opportunity to kind of, you know, send a message to his players or give a sense that we're still in this game. I'm still fighting to stay in this game. Uh, we're going to do this. Didn't do that. And we see sometimes adjustments made between periods, but very rarely sort of on the fly. And, he's a young coach, and I think he admits that he's learning some things. And I think, pulling the goalie, I think in some cases, I agree it's not all that useful. But, I think in both less so the St. Louis game, but definitely that game against the Rangers, I thought pulling him during that barrage of goals in the second period could have stopped the bleeding a little bit.
Well, it's because it's either one of two things. Either it was not the goalie's night, as he said about Allen the other day.
Uh-huh.
It was not his night. It was not his game, whatever. And then you're justified to replace him. Or you can pull the goalie as a mercy pull, where it's not because of him, but it's the team in front of him that's not doing well, and you need something to shake things up and refocus the team. So it doesn't have to be on the goalie. Sometimes he's just a victim of their circumstances, but that's one option that's at his disposal. And it has struck me once again how, he's reluctant to do that. So.
Yeah, and it does send a message sometimes. But more big picture, listen, I thought, again, mentioned that the scoreline doesn't suggest it, but I thought that was actually a relatively competitive game. I'd say the first 25 minutes of that game, and then there were stretches later where the Canadiens showed some real fight, despite giving up those 4 goals really fast in the second. But it's Cole Caufield gets 2 goals and an assist in the game. And we've talked a lot about that top line. We've talked a lot about Nick Suzuki. We've talked a ton about Juraj Slafkovsky, all with merit, and they deserve to be talked about. But Cole Caufield coming out of his slump. I believe we had an episode of this podcast that was titled "Cold Caufield."
I looked it up too.
Yeah. Yes. So we did have an episode of this podcast called "Cold Caufield."
Yeah.
He's not cold anymore. Now you look at over the last month or so. Since January 13th, this game against Edmonton on January 13th has been a real turning point for this top line. Since that day, Nick Suzuki is 7th in NHL scoring with 18 points. Cole Caufield, he's tied for 7th, I should say, with Austin Matthews. Cole Caufield is tied for 9th with 17 points in the NHL. Now, what's interesting about that is 10 of Nick Suzuki's 18 points in that span came on the power play. For Cole Caufield, it's only 6. He got 11 points at even strength in 13 games over that span. So he's getting it done at 5-on-5 and is not relying on the power play to be his sort of time to produce. And though he is producing, he has 4 power play goals in that span.
Yeah.
But he is getting most of his points at even strength, which I think speaks to the work that's being done on his game by Marty, by Adam Nicholas, the staff in general, and the level of buy-in that he's had. He's starting to see results for it, and I think this is a good reflection of how patient he was this season, because I don't think he enjoyed not producing for as long as he did.
No, and last week, only a few days ago, actually, I asked Marty about Slafkovsky and his defensive play, and he answered by including Caufield in his answer and saying that both guys had really made strides in improving their off-the-puck play. And it's true that Caufield is a lot more involved in his own end. But you see it also is off the play puck in order to keep plays alive in the offensive zone, along the boards, just using the stick effectively and intercepting passes and things like that, just to make sure that you sustain ozone time, and it's creating goals too in that way. So I think it's the objective back then when we had that episode of Cold Caufield. We were mentioning how there was certain frustration that was creeping into his game, but at the same time he remained adamant that he was working on becoming a more rounded out player, and that's clearly that objective has been achieved. But in the meantime, now that he has picked up in his goal scoring, and you could argue that there's a very legitimate chance that he might hit 30 despite his slow start. The bottom line for this player is that, despite the slow start, he could consider this season to be a great success. And I think that when we look at this Montreal Canadiens team and we see bad overall performances such as the one they had last night, you really have to focus on the guys that will still be there when it matters. To me, those are the guys that I look at the most. I don't really care about the journeyman or the guys that are just fringe players and that might be, pushed away by younger and better players eventually. I look at those who are part of the plan long term. And in that sense, it's encouraging. When you look at the Suzuki, Caufield, Slavkovsky line, when you look at Gouldy, when you look at Matheson, most of the time when you look at Montembeault too, Newhook didn't have a good game, but his previous couple of games before, since his return, he looked good too. Those are the guys that are making this season interesting and relevant in following until the end, no matter the results. And to that point, I mean, Caufield is as risen to the occasion, and it's exciting. You can take the sample size that you gave and say, oh well, he's top 10 scoring in the last month or so. Fine, it's a good stretch. He might have cold spells again, but it's just that he's just much more than just a goal scorer now, and that's what was the point since the beginning.
Well, I think you mentioned that. I mean, his 5-on-5 numbers from kind of a rate standpoint, goals are obviously down from last season. He scored 1.61 goals per 60 at 5-on-5 last season. He's at 0.63, but assists have gone up 0.66 to 1.1. And this is the most striking one. First assist per 60 at 5-on-5. Last season was 0.19 and now is 0.71. So it's more than tripled in terms of rates. But points are slightly down and everything. And this is kind of a reflection of his first half of the season, let's say.
Yeah.
But individual expected goals per 60 are up. Shots per 60 are up slightly, but still, basically the same as last year, like not any lower. Individual expected goals the same. So it's, even though he was sacrificing certain elements of his offensive game in order to round out his play, this recent stretch is getting his numbers up to a level that are different in some ways, but in important ways for him, more or less the same. I mean, his shooting percentage is still just at 6.25. It's not where it was at 16.19 last year at 5-on-5. So it's that explains the goals, because the expected goal numbers, as I mentioned, are the same. But and you see that he's getting chances, but the amount of extra touches he earns through his play off the puck, the recoveries that you mentioned, and what's even more encouraging is that he's doing it sort of in concert with his line mates. He's often like the second guy on pressure. Like Slavkovsky will go, and if they lose a puck in the offensive zone, Slavkovsky will go and initiate that first layer of pressure, and then Caufield will swoop in and he'll actually get the turnover, or he'll benefit from the work that Slavkovsky did. But that's anticipation. That's him recognizing what has to be done when he loses the puck, and his level of buy-in and commitment to playing this way is what's, if I'm the Canadiens, should be most encouraging. Is that he didn't care that he was, because there was a while he was getting a lot of questions about his lack of scoring, and
yes, I know
he didn't enjoy it. He didn't like it at all.
No.
So, but despite that, he never just said, "Oh, screw this. I'm just gonna start to float a bit, and I'm gonna leak out early. I'm gonna do things that maybe can get me some more goals because this sucks." I think to some extent, a lot of people say, "Oh, he signed the big contract, and now his production's gone down." But there's a possibility that signing that big contract allows him to do that. Allows him to say, "You know what, my numbers are down, but in the long run, this will be good for me. So who cares if my numbers are down? I've got a contract in my back pocket. I got security. I don't really need to produce goals other than helping my team win. But from a personal standpoint, in terms of his own future, doesn't need to worry about that in the right here and now, as long as he's doing the work that'll make him a better player overall." I don't know. Maybe there's something to that.
Yeah, well, it's also what this season is all about. It's really a fine-tuning type of season for these core players. And we were wondering at the beginning of season if Nick Suzuki had another gear, if he was who he was, or if he would continue like a certain level of development, and he is doing it. And in a more, I would say, subtle way. It's more the regularity in his play that's really showing up. But in terms of the drastic improvement in the style of play and in the variety of uses that Caufield can have on the ice, that's really that really pops out. So it's he's taking full opportunity of the fact that the team is focusing on getting better this year. But you're right. I think that the security of a contract and not having to prove himself and having the pressure to put up numbers for the time being is significant.
I'm just putting them up now. I just want to pick up on something you just said, though, that I think is interesting. I think it's worth talking about, because when you mention players who will be here in the future, and I agree with you 100%. That's how I look at the team. I try to look at the players who will be here when the team is good and focus on them, because I don't want to name a specific player, but a player who's clearly doesn't have a future here. It's hard to see any significance in what they're doing right now. And so, but it is striking when you list the players, because I agree with your list. It's not very long, No. Caufield, Suzuki, Slavkovsky, Newhook. Doc's not playing, obviously. Goalie Matheson. That's 6 guys. And there aren't really many other guys in the lineup. And even if you add Doc, that's 7 guys.
Yeah.
Montabo.
Well, yeah, he's been signed
8
and
guys.
he's going to be, yeah.
So it's really, when we talk about how young the team is, yes, there are young players on the team, but it's really not a reflection of what this team will be down the road. Like, I find it, there's so many guys where you just don't know where they fit. And, we answered questions in recent weeks, recent episodes about what are they going to do about Brendan Gallagher. You talk about a guy who signed, that's a guy who signed. What are they going to do about Josh Anderson, this guy that's signed? Jake Evans, are they just going to kind of let his contract run out? Like, what do they do? And so I find it interesting that there's a lot of parts here that are not a part of the future, or will only be a part of the future out of necessity, because their contract is going to keep them here. So
yeah, but there are guys like Xhekaj who could force their way, say, "Hey, you have to include me in that core," but it's up to him.
Xhekaj was told by management that he is a part of their future. That's what he was told by them. So, but he does have to prove it. And again, he's not been fantastic since he got called up from Laval. Had some ups and downs. I think this will be a good learning experience for him. And I do think that the Canadiens management is sincere in their desire to have him be part of the future. It's definitely But it is interesting to me because then when you look at Laval, and Joshua was on the team now, so I think maybe he should be added to that list of players who will be part of the future. But like if you look down at Laval, you got Mayu, Dobesh. I mean, there's a lot of young guys down there.
It's a lot of
How
question
many of
marks.
them? A lot of question marks. Yeah, a lot of there's not that many guys that you say, oh, he's definitely they're developing. Like Mayu's the only one in my eyes. Like there's really not that much more. I mean, Sean Farrell's a question mark.
Yeah.
I don't think was a question mark, and if you consider Roy Laval guy, then was the guy. But it's really they're in a. It kind of tells you where the rebuild is because they're still in a transitionary state. They have some pieces. They've drafted other pieces that are not who are not professional yet or who are not in North America. But within the organization itself, it's hard to spot a bunch of guys that will be part of this thing going forward. And it's it just makes you wonder how long it's going to actually take to get to that final destination when so many of the guys aren't here yet.
Yeah, that's true because you would assume that just based on talent and upside, Hudson and Reinbacher could be added to that group, but there's not that many apart from that. So yeah, it's you're right. It could be a long road, but we spoke at length in the last episode about a guy who could potentially come in to help them. A guy from another organization, Trevor Zegras, had got a lot of chatter, obviously, throughout the week. It coincided, obviously, with the visit of the Anaheim Ducks. But I'd like you to share your little exchange with Cole Caufield on Zegras because, because I knew he'd have something interesting to say about that.
Yeah, I spoke to. I was speaking to Caufield on Wednesday, and we were talking about Slav and about sort of the benefit of having a prove people wrong mentality. Caufield's had that his whole life, and has used it to great effect. And he talked about that. And we got to talking about various things, and then sort of came up. I shouldn't say it that way. I brought up, Trevor Zegras being potentially available. We were joking about how many players from the 2019 draft. Oh, this is what it was. So I was asking him about having a chip on your shoulder. So I said, do you get up for teams that passed you over in the draft? Because there's a lot of players who do. A lot of players remember teams that did not draft them, and they really get up for games against those teams. So he said no. And I was like, well, could you name all the teams? And he's like, probably, yeah. And he said, and then Newhook was at the other end of the room, and he's like, Newhook over there, I always remind him that he went after me. So then I was like, oh, yeah, it's kind of funny how many guys from the 2019 draft you have on this team, right? Ha ha. Like, there's another guy from that draft who could be available, and then brought up Zegras. And I told him how Greg Cronin, because after our episode recorded, we spoke to Greg Cronin after the Ducks morning skate, and he brought up Zegras on his own as a part of the future. He was answering a lot of questions about the rebuild and what's going on there. Very similar sort of situation to Montreal. The difference being that you look in their organization and a lot of their pieces are there. Like they've got them, they're there, and there's a lot of identifiable pieces that are playing right now that are in the AHL. And in their case as well, that are on their way. And so he mentioned that Zegras is a big part of their process, part of the rebuild, part of their future. And when asked about it, he really went to bat and addressed all of the things that we were talking about in the last episode. The defensive lapses and this and that, and character questions and what have you. And he told an anecdote about a lot was written about when I benched Zegras. This is Cronin talking. I'm paraphrasing. But he said there was a lot of talk about what happened when I benched Zegras in the third period in Columbus because he made a lot of turnovers. Well, when we won that game in overtime, the first guy waiting to congratulate all his teammates in the room was Trevor Zegras. And he said, I thought that really spoke to his character and him being a team first guy because he could have just moped and sulked and been like unhappy that he sat the whole third period, but he was just as happy as everyone else and wanted to congratulate his teammates for going and getting a win. So I mentioned to Caufield that Cronin had done this, that he had gone to bat for his buddy, and that he was, he sort of backed him up and wanted to get this narrative sort of nipped in the bud. And Caufield sort of off the cuff was like, oh, he did he? Nah, we could still get him. And he's kind of walked away. I think he was joking. He was joking, but it'd be funny if then I mentioned to him that Kako might be available for a trade, who they obviously face and who scored against the Canadiens, and then they would have, as we mentioned in the last episode, the second and third pick from 2019. But if you throw Zegras in there and Caufield and Newhook, that'd be a lot. That'd be 5 of the first 16 picks in that draft on the same team. But but just so further to that,
it was jokingly, but at the same time, I'm sure that he would love to have his buddy.
I'm sure he would. Yeah, I'm sure he would. And it was probably more of a joke than anything, but it definitely was. Let me make that clear. He was kidding around, but I thought it's worth. I just wanted to bring up what Cronin said because of everything that we talked about in terms of Zegras, and it was interesting to me that the coach would go so far out of his way. Listen, he knew where he was too, and he's heard the rumors, he's heard all the chatter. There's been so many people who have said Zegras to Montreal would be a good fit, and so he was aware. And like when he mentioned Zegras as a part of the future, I brought that up again, and that's when he kind of went in all these directions and talked about how, yes, they want to address his defensive game, but he is fully engaged in that. He found him to be a very coachable player. One thing he mentioned is that when he first got the job as the Ducks coach, he looked into Zegras' history. And the guy who recruited Zegras to go to Boston University and the guy who coached him at Boston University was Albie O'Connell. Albie O'Connell, up until this year, was a scout for the Canadiens. Was a college scout. He left the team last offseason. So if Greg Cronin went to Albie O'Connell to find out about Trevor Zegras, I have no doubt that Ken Hughes would have any trouble getting Albie O'Connell's phone number to talk to him about Zegras as well, if that were to be the case. But he mentioned, that O'Connell said the first thing he said about him was that he's coachable, and the Cronin's experience, that's what he's found. And so, the way he was talking about him, two things became clear. A, he's heard all the chatter. He knows what's out there. And B, if it seemed like if it were up to him, he would rather keep that guy. It's not up to him, of course. It's up to someone. It's up to his boss, Pat Verbeek, who was at the game on Tuesday. Must not have liked what he saw from his Ducks. It was to quote Michel Therrien, that was a pathetic performance. But prior to that game, that's what Cronin was talking about with Trevor Zegras. So I think it was only to give fair time. Like last week, we said a lot of things about him. It was interesting to hear this perspective on that guy. It doesn't make Trevor Zegras any less or any more of an interesting fit for the Canadiens, but it was if anything, it makes him even more appealing to the Canadiens. If you hear a coach who's as hard nosed as Cronin is, really go to bat for a guy like Zegras. It was interesting to see.
And who recognizes that the player is willing to get better and be coachable. That's encouraging. All right, let's switch back to Montreal Canadiens players. Over the weekend, we just mentioned the game against Anaheim. Over the weekend, the Evans, Pearson, Anderson line was really bad, but then they got better against Anaheim, especially Evans and Pearson. And then last night, Josh Anderson played his best game in a long time. He was extremely visible. He was a force. It was a power horse type of game from Josh Anderson. So that line as a whole was the Canadiens' best, the most visible. They created a ton of chances. It was nice to see Jake Evans being involved offensively for the second game in a row. Scoring for the second game in a row, which he has not done often in his career.
I showed a graphic. Apparently, he's done it
I think it was the third time.
It was the third time, which I was a little shocked to see that. I was surprised.
Well, when they score, they come in bunches.
Yeah, I guess they do. Yeah, I guess they do. But he had 6 shots on. He had 6 shots at 5-on-5 in that game. So that's.
So obviously,
or do you have 6 shots? Period. Yeah, 6 shots on goal on 8 attempts. Pretty good.
Yeah, it is good. It is good.
Yeah.
It must be
7 for 19 in the faceoff dot, but still. But yeah.
Yeah, well, the Canadiens, since they moved Monahan, they are not the same team at the faceoff circle. They were 53% with him, north of 53%, and they're at 47 now. It's a small sample.
Well, I mean, you swap out Monahan for Newhook. Monahan. What did I say? Monahan? Maybe that's Freudian slip. Monahan. Swap out Monahan for Newhook in the faceoff circle, and for sure you're gonna. I mean, Newhook was 3 for 10 last night, so.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So I wanted to bring up that line, but especially Tanner Pearson, because he's one guy who struggled because of injuries, because of I think sometimes styling fit, or at least fit on a line, struggled to really find his way in a Montreal Canadiens uniform, and now he's going to be a UFA at the end of the season. What do you see in the future for Pearson?
Well, I think Pearson has some runway here to show that he can be useful. He's not really. I mean, he's not being used on the penalty kill right now. He's being used on the power play. He's not being all that effective. I mean, 5-on-5, yes, his play has improved. But the problem with Pearson is his ticket. He's got $3.25 million. It'd be practically impossible for the Canadiens to trade him without retaining salary. And even at that, you're not getting a whole lot for him. So it's I think Tanner Pearson's future is he's going to hit the UFA market come July 1st. Like, it's just, it's not, it doesn't seem like he could, even in the next 3 weeks, that he could so drastically change the outlook of what's gone on for him this season. Because he did have another good stretch. He started the season well.
At the beginning.
If you remember. At the beginning. Him, sure. Monahan, and Gallagher. That was the line. The 3 redemption stories.
Yeah.
And they were playing well. They were doing really well. And then he fell off a cliff and couldn't produce for a long time. And then he got hurt. So I have trouble seeing a team. Well, I don't have trouble. I think it's impossible that any team would be willing to take him with no retention. Teams that would have any interest in him wouldn't have that kind of cap space. They're very rare, the teams that are buying, that have that kind of money to spend on a player who's as low impact as Tanner Pearson is. And I just don't see the Canadiens using their last slot on Tanner Pearson. I think the Canadiens would much rather use that slot to facilitate someone else's trade and get paid for that than they would to lose Tanner Pearson, because even Tanner Pearson, whatever he brings back, Tanner Pearson himself as a body to fill out the NHL lineup until the end of the season might have more value to the Canadiens. Like, just being an NHL guy that you can play regularly, as opposed to having to bring someone up from Laval who might not be necessarily ready for it, or that they don't want playing in Montreal because Laval's still trying to make the playoffs in the AHL. Like, there's all sorts of reasons why. So it's encouraging for Tanner Pearson that he's playing better, and I don't think it has a huge impact on what the Canadiens will wind up doing between now and March 8th, at least.
Yeah. There's no way that they could trade him without retaining salary. I don't see that.
0% chance.
0%. So even if, let's say, they retain half of his salary at 1.625, that's what basically, if they retain 50%, that's an affordable ticket for the team acquiring him. But even if the Canadiens were to receive a mid-round prospect for him at that price, I mean,
I don't see that happening.
But even if it was to happen, what's the use of another 5th-round pick for the Montreal Canadiens
There's none.
by using this retention slot? If you can keep it, Jake Allen, we'll get to that in a second, but Kent Hughes was on Pierre's podcast earlier this week, and if it doesn't get worked out prior to trade deadline, it can always be worked out in the summer. But if you want to move Jake Allen's contract on the last year of his contract, it might be useful prior to trade to July 1st or even after. But anyway, you could try to use that retention slot for Jake Allen. But if you use it only to get another 5th round in return for Pearson, I don't think that it's very productive. And for himself, he might think that he might not make the playoffs this year, but all in all, he might be better off showcasing himself in a higher role in Montreal than as a supporting cast for a contending team.
Well, it's clear that, just for the record, Tanner Pearson's not dying to get traded, but he would not be opposed to it. I mean, it's pretty clear. If he could play his way into a situation that a winning team would want him, and like his pedigree would be appealing to someone as like a last second ad, because you never know. I mean, it's we're talking the numbers 3.25, 1.625. I mean, these are their full season salaries, right? I mean, it's different.
No, they're prorated for the number.
They're prorated through the end, yeah. So there's most of it has been paid at this point, and so his remaining cap hit right now is a shade over 1. It's $1,050,000 roughly. So he'll be under $1 million by deadline day. Probably a fair bit under $1 million. So maybe at the very last second, if a team is like, I'd like to have a little extra insurance, we didn't use this money, a trade that they wanted to make didn't work out, maybe we'll take his whole boat because we don't need this money anyway, and it's now or never kind of thing, and it only cost us a 6th-round pick. In that case, absolutely trade it for a 6th-round pick. No problem. But that retention slot is valuable, and the question is whether the Canadiens will even reach that point with that retention slot, because I believe if a team calls them asking them to broker a deal and retain money on a player that another team's trying to acquire and they can get a 3rd-round pick for it or whatever, 2nd or whatever, the Canadiens are going to jump at that. And at which point that would be the only option, is that someone would have to take Pearson at the full boat. So someone's willing to do that.
Well, yeah, then sure.
Then there's no doubt. There's no doubt that he will get traded, but it'd be very hard to see.
Yeah.
It's a very specific, like that scenario I just laid out there is basically the only scenario under which he gets traded. That's in my opinion. Maybe I'll eat these words, but I think that's really where that stands. But good for him that he's playing better. I really do. He's a likable guy. He's gone through a lot. He's a pretty good hockey player. I mean, he's not the fleetest of foot, but he's useful. He's useful as sort of a grinder. And so if he plays well from now till the end of the season, maybe he can earn himself another contract somewhere. But I think that's kind of where it stands.
I don't think it is the end of the road for him. But
I don't think so either. But.
No. It's just going to be a more modest price.
Well, I think it's the end of multi-year contracts for more than $1 million for Tanner Pearson. I don't think that's going to happen, but I understand, and we shouldn't glaze over the fact that Anderson had a good game. I'm trying to figure this guy out. Like, this season's been so difficult for him. It would be good for him and good for the organization if he were able to find some level of consistency over the last, 6 weeks of the season, 7 weeks, whatever's left, and show what he can do again. And frankly, if he does it for a while, who knows this offseason, man? Honestly, like, if he has a good stretch to end the season, if he plays what's left, just under 30 games. If he could pop some goals and show what he can do, maybe that gives some ammunition for Ken Hughes to go and do something in the offseason. Because I think, as we mentioned last episode or the episode before, like there are a number of scouts who will always have time for Josh Anderson, and there are a number of GMs who will always have time for someone who has a package like Josh Anderson's. And all you need is a team to feel like they got bullied out of the playoffs. And that team's GM might be willing to have a conversation about a guy like that.
Yeah, it's just that the Canadiens, since there's still 3 more years of contract for Anderson after this one, they must not. They just need to make sure that they're not selling him low. They have to wait until the time that his value is picked up again, and it certainly has not happened this season. So it would be great.
You have to weigh the value. Strong. Yeah, you have to weigh his value versus the value of the cap space you'd be freeing up. Because the Canadiens are not going to retain on Josh Anderson for 3 years. Let's make that clear. Like, for him to be moved, he would have to be moved as a full vote kind of thing. Sure. So that in and of itself has some value. So even if you don't get the value back that you feel you deserve, and yes, you're selling low, but you also have to make a calculated decision. Listen, when they traded Joel Edmondson last summer, that was a trade where they really didn't know what was going to happen with Joel Edmondson. Like, that was a case of just getting what you can when you can, while you can, before that asset's value gets completely diminished or becomes impossible to move. No, Josh Anderson is obviously 3 years left, but he's hit 30 or on the verge of hitting 30.
I think he's still 29.
Yeah, he's 29. So, I mean, he'll be 30 soon.
And he's been healthy. He's a guy who's been, hampered by injuries quite a bit over the course of his career. Mm-hmm. But the fact that he's remaining healthy,
he'll be 30 in May.
Yeah. It's a good sign. The fact that he can prove that he can stay healthy. I think it's a big part of the upside that he can bring, and the fact that he hasn't lost a step, in terms of his speed, and he's got that package, as you mentioned. So, either the Canadiens, he increases his value and they find a taker for him in the offseason or next year, or the Canadiens, they keep him and they become good enough so that he can help them once they're a playoff team again, which would also be a nice conclusion to the whole thing. So,
So speaking of, I guess, Jake Allen is the other kind of side tentacle of that retention argument. Just to, Ken Hughes, you mentioned, was on Pierre LeBrun and Ryan Rashog's podcast this week, and really laid out the case for not being in a rush to trade Jake Allen. If he doesn't trade Jake Allen by March 8th, he feels relatively confident he'll be able to do something in the draft or do something in the summer with either Jake Allen or Caden Primo. But he basically committed on that podcast, and it's not that different from what he said in the past publicly in general, that he's going to resolve this he will not go into next season with 3 goaltenders. That's sort of what he said. And I think it's funny, Elliot Friedman recently, I think in one of his 32 Thoughts written things, wrote there's a book on Ken Hughes, which I was disappointed to hear because I was kind of hoping I would write the book on Ken Hughes at some point. But it's like, there's a book on Ken Hughes that he sets his price and he sticks to it, and he'll wait until he gets it. This, I think, was in reference. Elliot's been reporting all season basically that Ken Hughes has set a price on Jake Allen and refuses to move him until he gets that price. I'm of the impression that price is based on retaining on Jake Allen. It's not based on just trading Jake Allen. That there's a certain retention price that he's going to stick to, and I believe that to be true. But it's like, to me, one of the books on Ken Hughes is how he is constantly sending little messages through his media appearances that he's not in a rush to do anything. This has been happening. This has happened on numerous occasions. Joel Edmondson last year said that. Lehkonen, Petrie, twice. Not the second time, to be fair. He didn't say that. He said the opposite the second time, but the first time was like, we don't have to trade this guy. It's always been this message that we're not forced to do anything. We're not desperate to do anything. So if you don't want to give me what I feel is fair value here, or I think in the case of Jake Allen, if you're not willing to take him without retention, then maybe I just won't trade him, because it might not. If you're not going to make it worth it for me to retain on Jake Allen for the rest of this year and next year, then I can just keep him.
Yeah.
And this is kind of how, this is kind of how Kent Hughes likes to sort of set markets for his own guys. I mean, you just have to look at the way the Monahan trade went down. There was no reason for it to go down as quickly as it did.
Well, I think that for Monahan, he did have his set. He had a price.
He had a price in mind. He did. But why did it happen right after Lindholm? Where did the urgency come from for that trade to be made? It came from Kent Hughes. You listen to Kevin Cheveldayoff talk about that trade after it happened. Everything he said, there were all these little clues. You never know what another team's timeline is going to be. All these things he kept mentioning.
It was a renewed sense of urgency.
A renewed sense of urgency. The events of this week or the activity around the break created more urgency for this deal. He was all these. If you look at every answer he gave, it became obvious that the Canadiens basically gave him an ultimatum, and he had to move on it. So, when you hear Kent Hughes say, I don't have to trade player X, in this case, Jake Allen, by March 8th, that's kind of what he's doing. In my eyes, he's saying, you want this guy? You're either going to have to take him without retention, in which case you can basically have him not for free, but I'm not going to haggle over price if you take him with no retention. But if you want me to retain, there's going to be a price on it, and you're going to have to pay it. Otherwise, I have no problem keeping him. And so that's, at this time of year, I think that was very crafted messaging from the Canadiens GM on that file.
Well, I think it's perfectly normal that he wants to control the agenda, control the message as much as possible, send at least the perception that it's not the other general managers that are going to dictate his course of action, that he's comfortable with where he is, with each and every of his players. So it's normal. I think it's good GMing to portray that. What I wonder, though, is when it comes to Jake Allen, isn't he in a situation where other teams might call his bluff to a certain extent? I was speaking to someone from another team yesterday who said they could put him on waivers and he would not be picked up.
Yeah. So, I mean, well, because for him to be picked up on waivers, you'd have to pick up his whole contract.
Yeah.
That's why he wouldn't be picked up. That's why Primo would. I mean, that's, that's the whole game here with Jake Allen is the contract, is the money. And what price the Canadiens feel they should be paid to pick up the money next year. That's the game.
Yeah. But we just spoke, I know it's another season, but we just talked about Pearson, how unlikely it would be that somebody would pick up his old contract. Let's say it's the same through this idea of waivers with Jake Allen. Even if you were to retain 50% on Jake Allen for next year, that doesn't all of a sudden skyrocket his value to being like a high draft pick or a quality prospect or anything. So it's okay to set your demands. But if you don't raise the interest of anybody for a guy, if you eat all of his contract, I cannot imagine that all of a sudden, because you retain 50%, he becomes a very, very valuable asset. He gains some value.
I disagree completely. I mean, very, very valuable. I mean, it depends on what you call very, very valuable. I compare his value at full contract to being close to nothing. I mean, honestly,
yeah.
I don't know what they would expect. I would imagine if someone came up to him and said, we'll give you a 6th round pick and we'll take his contract off your hands, Kent Hughes would be like, done.
Sure. Yeah.
Deal.
Yeah.
But I think the retention is where the money, the value comes in. That's where they're going to extract value, because it's a pain in the ass for them to retain on Jake Allen.
For sure.
That puts them in 2 retention slots next year. So yeah, so that's it's the value is, a player's value on the market is set by the team that's trading him, especially when they don't feel an urgency to trade him. And when there's one season left on Jake Allen's contract at the draft, and there's potentially other teams interested in adding a veteran second goalie or tandem goalie, trading him without retention, with a salary cap bump coming and everything, and all the teams having sort of a financial reset at the draft, without retention becomes more of a possibility. And so I think if it's between trading him with retention at the deadline for a middling asset, or waiting till the draft and trading him with no retention for a middling asset, you take door number two is the more favorable one to take. But if you're convinced, if a team convinces you with something more than a middling asset to trade him before the deadline and eat money on him, but it has to be a significant asset for you to do so, that's why I think his value goes up if they retain, because in the Canadiens' eyes, that's the only reason they would retain, is if they got good value. So it's less to do with what other teams are willing to pay. It's more to do with what the Canadiens would set that price as.
Yeah, but at some point, if he's on the record saying that he doesn't want to go with 3 goalies next season, so at some point one becomes tied up to the other. It takes 2 to tango, because you'll need to find a team that's going to meet that price.
Well, it's easier to tango when you have 6 different dance partners at the draft,
Yeah, for sure.
As opposed to 1 or 2,
Yeah, and I think that there's a higher possibility that it might happen over the summer. There's a different outlook on your payroll, on your needs, on your potential, the potential trade partners. So there's definitely a lot more possibilities around the draft, or even after July 1st for, that's not impossible either. But anyway, when you talked about middling prospect, that I think that's where that's the territory we're in right now, I suspect.
Well, I think, if he gets traded at the draft or in the offseason, I think he might bring back a middling asset, whether that's a mid-round pick or a prospect. But that's what I think. I think you have to go above middling to get the Canadiens to retain on him before the deadline. Like that's what I'm saying, is that he might not be worth that, but you're going to have to pay that to get the Canadiens to do that. Like, I don't think the Canadiens have very little interest in retaining money on Jake Allen next year. That's the sense I get. So, and you also can't discount the possibility that they trade Cade and Primo. I find that's also pretty unlikely before the deadline, but at the draft,
that would be
it's a
out of the box at this point. Yeah, they would need to play him a ton. They would need to play him a lot and have him become clearly the number 2 goalie on this team until the end of the season to prove that he's on that right trajectory that we've seen in very limited action so far this season.
I think teams, because, I think obviously the Canadiens have been convinced they wouldn't make it through waivers all season. And so there's at least one team out there that's interested in him to some extent. If you trade for him, and then you could try to sneak him through waivers, send him to the American League if he doesn't work out. Whereas if you claim him on waivers, you have to keep him on the roster, or else you got to put him back on waivers. It amounts to the same thing, but it's always a possibility. $890,000 cap hit, RFA at the end of that, at the end of next year. It remains a possibility. It's not outside the realm of possibility that is also something that the Canadiens look at once they have the clarity of the season being behind them. So it's there as a possibility. Just want to throw that out there. Hey,
you mentioned Kent Hughes, but how about his colleague and boss to a certain extent? Just a quick word on Jeff Gorton, and he's been linked to the Columbus Blue Jackets because of his past history with John Davidson with the New York Rangers. Obviously, after Jarmo Kekalainen got the boot in Columbus, there's an opening. There's a vacancy for a GM position. personally, I don't see how Gorton would go from vice president of hockey ops to returning to a GM role. It would be a demotion, so he would need to really want to be like the one guy deciding everything and make sure that Davidson doesn't have both hands into whatever he would be doing in order to accept a move like this. But career wise, I would find it strange if it was to happen, honestly.
Well, listen, I mean, this is something. I mean, Darren Dreger tweeted this on Thursday,
Yeah.
not long after the news of Kekalainen being fired dropped, 12:05 p.m. Um, he mentions the history with Davidson and Gorton being a GM at heart. Um, Guys like Darren Dreger don't just randomly tweet things like that. Like, he's obviously heard that, whether it's from Davidson himself or someone in the organization or someone close to him, that this is someone that Davidson would like to hopefully pursue.
Mm-hmm.
And why wouldn't he? They do have a history together. They presumably worked well together. They both got fired together by the Rangers. But yeah, I find it, it's one thing for John Davidson or whoever in Columbus to say, yeah, we'd really like to see if we can do this. It would be a demotion for Jeff Gorton. It would be Jeff Molson's right to not grant that permission. I would think that Jeff Gorton would want to see this through, just as you kind of mentioned. But this is coming from somewhere, is my point. It's not just a well-respected journalist shooting off the hip, kind of like, here's off the top of my head, here's something I think. This clearly comes from somewhere. So whether the Canadiens would be open to that, whether Jeff Gorton would even be open to that, I think Darren Dreger was on Montreal radio on TSN 690 this morning, and even he stated he has no idea the level of interest Jeff Gorton would have in this, but that he would fully expect Columbus to reach out and ask permission. So it's obviously coming from someone in Columbus.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, anything's possible. Anything's possible. Maybe Jeff Gorton wants to move back to the States. Maybe he doesn't, he's never really lived in Canada before. Like, maybe anything's possible. I don't know. But I would think he would want to see what he started through.
Yeah,
in Montreal.
I think so too. And the other thing is that Jeff Molson, I think, firmly believes now in having two people at the top of hockey management, and it would need. I think that Kent Hughes would need a bit more seasoning if the Canadiens have any sort of say in whatever happens to Gorton. I mean, they cannot. At some point, if he wants to leave, he would have to go at the end of his contract. But I could very well see in a few years down the road Kent Hughes having a bit more experience, being a bit less excitable from the everyday hockey ops, and taking on the role of a VP, and in his turn getting a greener, general manager to work in tandem with him, and then Gorton could start a new project and do his thing somewhere else. But in the short term, that would be weird, because they're really invested in a project. I think that when you use the expression "seeing it through," that's exactly it. You're in the process that you started, that you believe in, and you're seeing the wheels starting to turn, and you're going to turn to an organization that forces you just to go back 3 spots, like on the board. If you're playing a board game. It would be a weird career move. I mean, hey, if it happens, it happens. That's okay. But personally, I don't. I understand the connection with Davidson.
Yeah.
But now Gorton's not there anymore. Gorton's now in the hockey circles, and in terms of responsibilities, he's an equal to Davidson. Whereas
exactly
in New York, he was to Davidson what he is to Kent Hughes.
Yeah, or what Hughes is to him.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. Yeah. So listen, I mean, all this is to say that Darren Dreger doesn't just make stuff like that up. We both know Darren Dreger. It's not. He's not just sitting on his phone having a beer and being like, yeah, you know what would be funny? Wouldn't it be funny if John Davidson went after Jeff Gorton? Like, let me throw that out there. No, these things come from somewhere. So it's not just him just hypothesizing. Yeah, there's probably going to be a call at some point from someone in Columbus to Montreal. Whether Jeff Molson accepts it or not is up to him. Okay, it's time for Future Friday. Future Friday. Future Friday. Future Friday. Future Friday. It is Future Friday. All right, nice.
Jingle. I'll let you go this time.
Yeah, I was asked. You did.
Yeah, there are some listeners that asked me to let you go. So hey, enjoy. Play it on repeat. To your heart's content.
There it is.
I'll just press.
Skip. Yeah. No, I thought it was a good jingle. I'm going to try and work on it for next week. I'll work on it for next week. Okay, so this week we decided we would look at 3 of the Canadiens prospects in the OHL, and I think this is worth mentioning. Earlier this season, we did a podcast. We kind of had a little fun with Nick Bobrov's use of the word unicorn to describe Florian Xhekaj. I think we thought it was a bit much, and it might still be, but we should say that right now Florian Xhekaj has 25 goals in 49 games in the OHL. His previous high at least on his Elite Prospects page, his previous high as a goal scorer was 17 goals in 48 games with the Junior B Pelham Panthers of the Ontario Greater Junior Hockey League. So he has well surpassed that. In his last 10 games, he has 10 goals, 1 assist for 11 points, which is an excellent Cy Young candidacy. Yes. In his last 4 games, he's got 6 goals, 1 assist, 7 points. He was a late draft. He was an overage draft pick. What do you make of this? You make anything of this? I think it's obviously encouraging, but you look at his frame. You look at his
I understand. I think that if he had done this as an 18-year-old, I mean, look, his 19-year-old season right now, strictly in terms of points, looks a lot like Josh Anderson when he was 19 with the London Knights. Obviously, that goes back 10 years ago. Levels have changed a little bit since then, but you could argue that it's similar. So there's a possibility there that they could pan out to be. He could pan out to be like a comparable, similar big guy, and he skates fairly well. Maybe not as Josh Anderson, but still. But at the same time, he's 19 years old, and to me, I wouldn't get too carried away with a guy who's producing at 19 in juniors, because that's what you expect, no? I mean,
not where you weren't drafted in your draft year, you don't expect it.
I know, but he was drafted 4th round as an overage player. Now he gets into he gets in whatever he was drafted. Now he's considered as a guy who's a prospect. He's deemed. He's eligible for Future Friday, man. So
he's eligible for Future Friday. Well, he's in.
That's it.
He's drafted. That's definitely makes him eligible.
So So among drafted guys, I mean, this is the level of for a forward, for a guy who's not who's there because he's big and he's got also some offensive acumen. It's certainly encouraging. It suggests that they have not missed the target. But am I like getting all so excited because he's getting his best season at 19? Yeah, it's good. But to me, I reserve my judgment.
His numbers are better than Josh Anderson at 19. Just for the record. I mean, Josh Anderson was not a point-a-game player. He was 49 points in 68 games. He had 23 goals. What's wild is that Josh Anderson was a 4th-round pick.
No. That said he was 18 back then. Look it up.
I'm looking at it right now. He's 19.
He's 19 years. 27 goals in 59 games at 19.
Oh, right. Yeah, he started the year at 19. Gotcha. That was the year after he was drafted,
Yeah, it's D plus
which
one,
was
right?
which is his D+1, right? Gotcha.
Hmm.
But what's crazy is that Josh Anderson, that you bring him up, is that Josh Anderson was the 95th overall pick, fourth round pick, Columbus, and Xhekaj was 101,
Yeah,
fourth round
okay.
pick. Almost similar. Okay. So anyhow,
But he's on the right track. There's certainly
no.
sorts of encouragement there. He's doing highlight reel goals.
Yeah.
There's a buzz around him that wasn't there at all over the summer or even at the beginning of the season. He got into the conversation. That's a good
Right.
thing about Xhekaj.
Yeah. And yeah. In summary, I care and you don't. That's how it is.
Yeah.
Owen Beck. Owen Beck is another guy we want to talk about because Owen Beck, since being traded to the Saginaw Spirit, has 26 points in 16 games. He had 30 points in 25 games with Peterborough prior to the trade. His last 4 games, he has 6 goals, 3 assists, 9 points. He is, not only him, though, it's worth mentioning, Saginaw as a team is a truck. I mean, they score goals in bunches, but really for a guy who the organization wanted to see his offensive potential shine, being on a team like Saginaw and producing at the pace that he's producing, which frankly in his time in the OHL, he has not produced points at a rate this high than he has in his 16 games with Saginaw, is probably a good thing development wise. And the fact that he's got a guaranteed spot in the Memorial Cup and all that thing, but seeing Owen Beck pop offensively, I've got to think people in Montreal are pretty happy about that.
For sure. When you talk about his production, since he got traded to Saginaw, his point production is 1.63 per game. Mm-hmm. So if you look at the leading scorers in the OHL, over the course of the whole season, if he had maintained that rhythm over the course of the whole season, 1.63 point per game, would be best. It would be 6th best in the OHL. So that's been his cadence since he's been traded from Peterborough. So this is very encouraging. When you're like, you become the lead forward on a very high caliber team, that's always good news. And we know already that he's got defensive acumen. He's got other things going for him. So even though it might not be the sign that he's up for great things offensively, at some point you need to dominate at that level. You need to have an impact on both ends of the ice, because too often I hear about 200-foot player, which means defensive player, but 200-foot player means that you have an impact on both ends. And we need to see that impact on the offensive zone for Beck, and we're definitely seeing it now in Saginaw. So it is very encouraging. I think that the next step for him is when he gets into those most meaningful games. If he enters the Memorial Cup tournament, I want him to raise the bar and be a difference maker on his team. Can you not only produce points or block tons of shot or whatever in a big game? Are you a game changer at that level, at the OHL level? So I think it'll be the next step to see. But I think that the Montreal Canadiens must be super excited with the guy that they've got there. He was drafted early in the second round, but he was first round talent.
Yeah, definitely first round talent, and he, he's, when we were talking earlier about who is part of the future, who will be on the team when they're successful, it's hard not to see Owen Beck on the team when they're successful. Whether that's, I think it's probably at least 2 years away, but I could see him, and the question for me, and I think the question that he has to answer himself with his performance is he going to just be a bottom 6 guy, or can he somehow become an option higher up in the lineup? Can he prove that? But if he becomes a third line center for the Canadiens, like, that's a win. you win. You picked up a solid two-way center who can produce out of the third line spot early in the second round, very early in the second round, first pick of the second round, if I'm not mistaken. Then you've done well. I think you've done well. If you got a top 9 centerman, and there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with that. Last season with Peterborough, by the way, he had 16 points in 22 games, which was less than his regular season production with them. But yeah, it was okay. But I would agree that having sort of an impactful postseason would be something that the organization would want to see as well.
Anyway, he was on a very low scoring team. Peterborough was not very effective.
Right.
But I think that with Beck, when you mentioned third line center is maybe even more. I think that it's the range to make a comparison. I think that it'll be interesting to see if he becomes Jake Evans or if he becomes Filip Danault. To me, there is
exactly.
The huge win, the home run swing would be that he becomes Filip Danault.
Yeah.
But he might be just Jake Evans. Who knows? But I think that there's a lot in his game that screams NHL player, which is already very satisfying. So we'll see. It's going to be a very interesting development project for the Canadiens.
Owen Beck's presence doesn't bode that well for Jake Evans's ability to be part of the future of this club. I mean, that's also the other reality. I mean, Jake Evans has, another year under contract at 1.7 mil. That is the year where you would assume Owen Beck is playing in Laval, and then Jake Evans is a UFA. And so is a year in Laval going to be enough for Owen Beck? I would tend to think so, just because of the sort of the pro style game he plays right now. Could be just a total handing of the torch from one guy to the next.
From one to the other,
yeah. So I guess
the third guy in the OHL is Filip Mesar, and I remember we had a Future Friday focused only on him. Actually, I think we had 2 very early in the season
because he was doing so well.
Exactly. Now, not so well. But I wonder if he missed a few games because of a hit to the head. Not too long ago, only I think it was barely more than a week. But he's had 3 goals and 4 assists in his past 11 games. Now he's up to 39 points in 30 games. Kitchener has gone through a rough patch. They won only 2 of their last 10 games, 1 in regulation, 1 in overtime. But the fact that he goes through these dips in juniors, is it a source of concern for you?
Well, I think that the source of concern is the deja vu kind of nature of it. Listen, it's last season, Filip Mesar was going really well, went to the World Juniors, came back, wasn't so good. So last season, before the World Junior Championships, now this is obviously he's a year younger, not a year where you're expected to produce in the OHL. So at that age, having played 17 games, putting up 10 goals, 12 assists, 22 points is pretty good, frankly. More than a point a game at that age, great. Yeah. Came back, 35 games played, 7 goals, 22 assists, 29 points. Going from 10 goals in 17 games to 7 goals in 35 games, a little bit concerning. One of those episodes that you referred to, I had spoken to Mike McKenzie about him, the GM in Kitchener, and he said that, yes, the production wasn't there. We felt that there were other parts of his game that were being rounded out during that time, which they were seeing the results of this season. So this season, prior to the World Junior Championships, Mesar played 20 games with Kitchener, had 13 goals, 19 assists, 32 points in those 20 games. And as you mentioned, since returning from the World Junior Championships, 3 goals, 4 assists, 7 points in 10 games. So to me, it's yes, that he has these dips, and he still has time to get out of this dip. Like this is not necessarily going to define the rest of the season, but the fact that both times the World Junior Championship seemed to in some way bust his momentum, even though, you would think playing at a higher caliber and playing in a big stage event sort of would sort of give you a boost in some way.
Mm-hmm.
Both times it didn't do that. It hasn't so far. I don't want to say for Mesar that this is going to be what it's going to be, but and as you mentioned, the injury could have something to do with it, but that was pretty recent. So it would be good for the Canadiens to see him finish the season strong, especially after last season, how it finished after the World Juniors. Like, you don't want this to become a narrative where you start out great, you finish slowly, and that extends into your pro career. You become Brian Savage essentially, and you don't really play when the games are most important. That's not something that you want attached to you.
No. Being Mr. October in baseball is great.
Yeah.
In hockey, not so much.
Hockey, not so much. So let's see what happens. We'll keep an eye on it, but so far been pretty average since his return from the World Juniors.
Yeah. So Xhekaj trending up, Beck trending up, Mesar trending down. I really wonder ultimately where he's going to find himself in the list of if we had to picture a list of the Canadiens prospects where Mesar would land.
Well, that's his disadvantage. That's Beck. To me, it's clear that Beck's going to be on the team when they're good. Like I would be stunned if Owen Beck was not playing on the Canadiens when they become a consistent playoff team.
Yeah.
Like Mesar, I'm not sure. I mean, he could be. He's super talented. Like, he's got lots of talent. He could be a piece of that puzzle, but it's not obvious to me.
No, he's easy to forget when we think of the Canadiens.
Well, to me, he's kind of like, I mean, they kind of have Newhook.
Yeah. I
kind of see Newhook as being like the guy would play a Mesar type role on a team, like the speedy, handsy guy who, that's kind of Mesar can play center, but is better on the wing. Newhook can play center, but he's better on the wing. So listen, there's no rush. I mean, Mesar has time to sort of carve his own way and make himself indispensable, if you will. But you got a team that's looking like you're going to have Caufield on the wing on one line. You're going to have Newhook on the wing on the other line. Then you're down to your third line. You really want a Mesar type on your third line necessarily, even if he's playing. Maybe he can play with Beck on the third line and provide some offensive pop in the top nine. Who knows? I don't know, but it's not as clear. Forwards. Well, it's not as clear to me.
Yeah,
it's definitely I see a clearer path for Owen Beck to being an important part of this team than I do Filip Mesar, for sure.
Yeah. I think that the size element is also something. We started this Future Friday by talking about Florian Xhekaj. He's 6'4", so he's 6. That's always 6
He's
foot. He's
got a mean streak. He's a Xhekaj.
Exactly, 6'4", who's got a mean streak and can score goals. It draws the attention. Whereas Mesar, if he's a smaller guy who cannot, really raise above the competition at the OHL level despite his skill level, there is concern there.
Yeah, but let's see. He's got a lot of time. It's only February 16th. It's got a couple of months here to show what he can do this season and sort of change the narrative. But at first blush, right off the hop here, not great coming out of the World Junior break for a second year in a row.
Not great, Bob.
Yeah.
All right.
Not great, Bob.
Well, thank you so much for listening, everybody. We'll be back on Monday. So until then, enjoy the game against Washington. Second game in 10 days against that opponent, this time at the Bell Center.
Don't forget, Monday is our mailbag episode. So you can email mailbag questions, basuandgodin@gmail.com. Hit us on X @basuandgodin. And don't forget that we read the comments on Apple. So if you leave a review on Apple and you write something there, we read that. So even if it's bad, but just write something. It'd be great if just feedback, what you'd like us to do, how you feel about the show, whether it's good, whether it's bad, whatever. Just put something there. We read those things. I swear to God.
Yeah. On YouTube, like when you kept interrupting me and you had to adjust that.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I did. And actually, I don't know if no, I think that was on Twitter. The listener who objected to you not allowing me to do a Future Friday jingle. So you see,
yes,
you get a comment across, and it enacts change. Positive change came as a result of communicating with us. You see, now Marc Antoine lets me do the Future Friday jingle. Future Friday, Future Friday. See, there you go. That's the jingle from now on.
One step at a time, everybody. All right. Thank you so much. See you on Monday.